Hello everybody, my name is Andrew and welcome to a special Zero Camp video about the 2025 rules update for War Machine. So before we dive into this massive rules update, I just want to let you know that we're going to be covering both the core rules changes and the command card changes in this video, and then the army-specific changes for the prime armies in separate video parts. This is going to be a multi-part video series just because there's so much information to cover. We're going to try to keep the length of each video pretty much digestible. So be sure to check out the playlist. We suggest stepping into this one first just because this is going to be the video that talks about most of the rules changes that affect pretty much everybody. But then feel free to watch all of them for all the army-specific changes for Mark IV, or you can skip to just your favorite Mark IV army. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into the core rules. This is going to be the big one that we talk about that impacts pretty much everybody as we're going into this. And oh boy, are there some fun little changes in here. So as we get into these core rules updates, the first thing I want to talk about is spell selection for armies. I list two of the changes they have here, both the racking spell section and the spellcaster section, just because while these two areas did change, realistically what it means for you as players is that we cannot select spells that we already had in the spell list for casters. It seems like a silly clarification, but mostly it's just going to help out our newer folks as we get into it. You can't pick spells that are already on your spellcaster signature spell list. You can't pick spells that you've already selected on a spell rack for your casters. Really just a nice clarification. This was kind of a common sense thing that we had going into it, so no real big change there, but it's cool to see. This one I'm going to talk about briefly. Not a lot of folks play monstrosities. Cursebound Cadre. But there are monstrosities that do exist in the game. One of the nice things that we have is that we now have the rage-fueled section for monstrosities, and we'll see this again later in some other stuff, allows for you to make a choice about whether or not you're picking up a focus when that model takes damage. It's no longer forced to. That matters in a few corner cases. There's some Legacy Army rules interactions, particularly Orion from Convergence of Cyrus, where that really matters. But there's other corner cases where you may not want something to be fully loaded, potentially on focus as it goes into the next turn. We also have a nice clarification about disengaging. I'm going to read this one out loud because this is kind of a mouthful, and then I'm going to put it in some context. So the change in the text is that a model in a unit that was engaged prior to being placed as a result of its unit charging never makes a charge attack and must forfeit its combat action, that activation, unless it is placed within melee range of all models that it were previously engaged with. Now, what does that mean? So this is a corner case sort of thing. What we saw where we had models with Unstoppable or being granted Unstoppable that were engaged with models already. Another model in their unit was eligible to declare a charge and declared a charge. You take that model that was engaged, place it back into the melee range of the same models it was engaged with, and because it had Unstoppable, it could still make melee attack actions, and because it now was part of a charge, it made charge attacks. That is no longer the case. That model cannot make charge attacks anymore. Again, really corner case here. It's not something we saw super often in the game, but it did come up. It just means now that you're not cheesing to get that extra one, maybe two models into charge attacks that you should not have been able to because they were already engaged. Dust Devils. So this one's going to be fun because Dust Devils used to be part of some pretty egregious debuff stacking for range penalties, where you could have models that you didn't want targeted by range attacks to be standing inside Dust Devils, and models targeting them would get a ranged penalty. That is no longer the case. Dust Devils do now provide some defense against range shooting, which is fantastic. +2 defense against range is nothing to laugh at. But the range penalty only applies to models inside Dust Devils making ranged attack rolls. So if you're stacking Warping Winds or Windstorm, say if you're Chimera or Orgoth, that no longer stacks with a Dust Devil. That's going to make things less awful for ranged armies. They no longer have to contend with as much range debuff. There were other ways to stack it. There's other things to do. There's still range defense. It's just not a range penalty. So that's nice to see. Now, kind of the last thing I want to talk about with the core rules section is something that's actually not listed in the core rules on Steamforge's page, but it is that the Propelled rule itself changed. And I'm going to talk about it here because it has a blanket impact on more or less everybody in the game. The Sky Raider and Sky Bomber mercenary battle engines can be played by all the Mark IV armies. You've also got the Sea Raiders have both the Pig Dirge and the Pig Battle Brig that had the propelled rules. So we see this pretty commonly now in the game. It no longer functions the same way. You no longer have a value attached to propelled that allows you to, say, move 10 inches and then have a repo 2 at the end of the activation, allowing you to make a 10-inch move and then fire with, like, say, a range 10 gun. Giving you just a flat 20-inch threat range was kind of silly. They've changed it now so that way propelled models operate the same sort of way other models in the game move, which is they have a speed value, they usually have a reposition value, I believe all of them do, but they can't charge, they can't run, they can't aim, they can't become knocked down. So those parts of propelled stay the same, but now they have a move value and a reposition value. So their threat range is pretty static. We know what it's going to be pretty much at all times, and it's not going to necessarily be as bad as it used to. But again, thought it was worth mentioning propelled here just because of the changes and how it impacts everybody, but we'll talk about the models it changes as we get to those different things. It's worth noting, kind of just to touch on the overall changes for the rules really quick before we move on to command cards, that realistically there weren't a lot of big changes. The Dust Devil change is indicative of something we'll see throughout the different armies if you watch all the videos or if you've read through all of the updates already, where we're trying to limit the range debuff stacking, so that way shooting armies aren't getting huge penalties to range against a whole ton of models. They're getting penalties where it is appropriate. There's still defense against shooting with range penalties or range defense, but it's not as stacked as it used to be. Otherwise, it's just some nice clarifications, and I think the change to Propelled really is just a streamlining of the rules. That's going to make it a lot easier for newer players to grasp what's going on because they now work the same way that these models have since this. Most of these models have since the start of the War Machine. So with command cards, there were two big changes to them. The first is that there were significant updates to all of them. There are now fewer command cards. They streamlined that process quite a bit. And in doing so, they also set about creating essentially a set of 5 preset command cards for all of the Mark IV, the Prime armies, that are auto-selected anytime you make a list, but that you can change if you'd like. Those 5 choices are essentially designed to help newer players select command cards without an overwhelming selection, also to kind of guide you potentially in what the developers think that a list for that army should do. But again, you're allowed to make changes to it. So now let's talk about what's going on with the command cards. There were 18 command cards that everyone could take. There's 10 now. That's it. There's only 10. So we're going to go through all the changes to all 18 of them just to kind of show what's going on. The big thing I'll talk about as a blanket for all of these moving forward, not just Blessing of the Gods here, is that every one of them is now cost 0. There is no more cost to command cards at all. So with Blessing of the Gods, it remains unchanged. But we're skipping over Arcane Forces because it's been entirely removed. Breakthrough here also remains unchanged. Careful Reconnaissance, no change here either. So Defenses remains unchanged as well. Duck and Cover actually changes. It's a very short line of text here, but the big change here is that you can no longer select solos or leader models as targets for Duck and Cover. Only warrior units. So units can gain cover, which is fantastic, and blast resistance. That's awesome. You can't do that to warcasters. You can't do that to solos now. So you can't just leave your caster hanging out in the wind. And that's important, too, with another change that we'll come up with here in just a second. Hit and Run. This one remains unchanged. We skipped over Grave Robbing and High Alert because those have both been removed. But Grave Robbing gets to add its effects to Lucky Penny. Here is Lucky Penny. Well, again, we skipped over Infiltration. Infiltration has been removed as well. So Lucky Penny, this one has essentially combined the effects of Power Swell and Grave Robbing into one command card. At the start of a friendly model's activation, you can give it a Corpse Token, Essence Point, Focus Point, Fury Point, Rage, or Soul Token. Essentially, if you can give it a token, you can do it with Lucky Penny. The other important distinction here is that it's at the start of the activation. So no longer like what you had with Power Swell can you say, cast a bunch of spells, Power Swell in the middle of the activation to get one more focus so that way you can get another attack, boost another spell or anything like that, or say camp an additional focus or fury. Also, because this is combined with the Grave Robbers, this means you cannot give Crix casters a soul who have the Soul Collection feature on one turn and then on the next turn, give them another focus to give them up to focus on their turn. No more of that shenanigans. You hear that? No more. Old Faithful's been reworked pretty hard. It no longer is just Warjacks. You can now target cohort models with it. So monstrosities, War Beast, Warjacks, all of that stuff, fair game. It also removes D3 plus 1 damage points. This is going to make it a little bit less spiky, so if you need to repair 2 systems or 2 spirals, you now know you have got your bases covered. It is no longer that chance of rolling a 1 on a D6 and suddenly having your Warjack or War Beast not as functional as you were hoping for. So as we talked about already, Power Swell has been removed. We have Put the Fires Out, which has not changed. We have Sapper, which has not changed. We've removed the Savagery and Sentry Duty cards, Spotters, and True Inspiration, bringing the total down to, for everyone, to 18. And then we have this fun gem for the Motherland. Right now, this is the only army-specific command card for Prime armies. The Grimm can still retain theirs for their Arcana. For the Motherland is almost identical to what True Inspiration was for everyone else prior. One of your warrior models / units gains stuff for 1 round. But again, it's important to know only Winter Corps gets this at the moment. So they have access to 11 command cards, whereas everyone else should have access to 10. But to talk about command cards really quick, just as an overall change, it mostly is just a streamlining of the game. We've removed 18 options. We've taken away 8 of them. We've turned it into 10. We've simplified some stuff. We've streamlined a little bit. We have taken away options for some of the more veteran players who like to play with all the tools. You'll get over it. I think overall this is a really positive change with the command cards. 18 choices was a lot. One of the things I do say in the development notes for this that we'll talk about here because it's not on the webpage is that with the taking of things like, say, Grievous Wounds or Eyeless Sight because of Sentry Duty or because of Savagery, these things have been added back into armies that did not have these tools already that needed them. You'll see it in some of the Prime armies. Winter Corps, for instance, picks up Grievous Wounds in a few places. You see Eyeless Sight essentially added to models that did not already have it inside of factions where there was not already access to Eyeless Sight, where they were using Sentry Duty. That's going to be the format for pretty much all these videos, is we're going to talk through the changes just as they come across on Steamforge's text update that they posted on their website. We'll have the link in the down below section. And that concludes part 1 of our series, where we just talked about the core rules update as well as the command cards. Thank you very much for watching. This year, Zero Camp is trying to be on the road to 1,000 YouTube subscribers. Woohoo! At 1,000 YouTube subscribers, YouTube pays us to produce content. So we're really hoping that you can like, subscribe, share with your friends. We're hoping to get the good word of War Machine out to everybody too. It's a fantastic game. We love the hobby, and we're loving sharing information about it too. We're looking forward to providing a lot more content this year, so be sure to check out the rest of the videos in this playlist, or even if it's just the one for your favorite army. And hopefully we'll be seeing you around as well on our Wednesday stream. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.